Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another installment of the Still Rolling Show. We're back with you for another week, which is great. You guys are tuning in. And we have with us today the delightful Doug Torres. So welcome, Doug. How you doing, buddy?
Thank you. Thank you so much, Josh. Thank you guys for having me on your space. I really appreciate it.
Oh, we really appreciate it, honestly. And to give you guys a bit of context, I actually heard about Doug because of a wonderful thing he's doing with a collaborative of filmmakers over in the States called Film Round Table. Now, from my perspective, this is a wonderful resource because it brings together people that I'm certainly looking up to within the industry for one, but like the insight and knowledge these guys have is just, what these guys don't know isn't worth knowing for sure. So firstly, thank you for bringing that to my attention. But from your perspective, where was the motivation come from? Like, what got you guys round table? And
that's a great question. It's a collaborative effort that's put together. I have several partners. So Bradford Young, the cinematographer, is one of them, as is Matthew Wolf, who is another cinematographer well known in the commercial world. Erin Weil, who is a commercial producer, or has been. She's kind of semi-retired to do this and other things at this point. And Maria Prieto, who is Rodrigo Prieto's daughter, this Scorsese cinematographer. So it's quite an eclectic group. And it came about with the original idea, was about being able to get people together. And, as the time of COVID happened, a lot of people were taking to online venues to, have discussions initially centered around what does COVID and not working mean. This is the first time since the pandemic of 1918 that the entire film business has been idle together at once.
Wow.
So we also saw it as a great opportunity amongst ourselves with all the different connections we had to bring people together and to share space and to, in a lot of ways, demystify the filmmaking process, right? So a lot of it was about reaching out to young filmmakers and also reaching out to our peers as well and discussing the process in many ways. We've had discussions with cinematographers, production designers, location managers, directors. A lot of it is centered around the teamwork aspect of putting together a team and tackling a project. So, demystifying it is a really great way to put it, because we have a lot of younger filmmakers out there who think the process is really complicated, and difficult, but it's not. It's simple once you put the right people together, and kind of address whatever creative storytelling you're looking for.
Yeah, I definitely think that's, from my own personal perspective, feedback that I'd give is like, whenever I'm speaking to anyone about this, frequently I might get, friends who have got kids or whatever, like, oh, my son or daughter loves the idea of this, that, and the other. But they certainly from my perspective, I've always found like even explaining what I do is very much not the most simple procedure. As a director, part of my job is that. And it's like, well, what does that person do? And it's not always the easiest conversation to have without trying to oversimplify it. So yeah, it's a wonderful thing you guys have been doing. And I certainly tuned into a couple so far, specifically with Bradford Young and Reed Morano. It was really amazing to hear. As I said on the previous show of this, I had a chat with some of my guests about this, because what I found outside of that initial sort of conversation about demystifying things was more to hear from their perspective how they felt the sort of working environment was for the industry. Because I know that certainly within the UK, there is an idea that the industry is sort of perpetuated by people just working as much as possible, putting in as many hours as possible. And it's kind of just like par for the course. Like, this is the film industry. Everyone works 24-hour days. And it's very much your life, rather than it is like, I have my job and I have this. Of course, we're all passionate individuals. And it's sort of, I speak for myself, and I know a lot of people that are at different levels within the industry, that this, it becomes an extension of your life, from the passion that you kind of have thinking about how to get involved with it. But then certainly as you find your feet through it, it's like, well, you don't feeling like it's work too much. So it was really fascinating to hear them talk about the lifestyle, specifically Bradford, sites, having conversations with his wife and his kids and stuff like this about how he's readdressing that balance, and it's really interesting to see from that level that conversation is filtering back down. And ultimately, they're having that conversation with, producers, people like yourself. It's important to mention obviously from your perspective, what part of the industry you play. This is something I'm very happy to help demystify the audience from our perspective today, because one of the things that we're trying to do on this show is show, obviously, we're trying to, lift that veil on what other parts of the industry do, but specifically roles. I want to show what these, there's hundreds of people that collaborate on a feature film, let alone on even smaller scale stuff. And it's like, right, who do we definitely need on skeleton crews? And there's sometimes like, right, we've got this much time and this much money. So it's not always the sort of like, right, we might, it's a terrible thing to say, but sometimes it's like, we've got to really think about who's coming and who's bringing what to the table. But, Doug Torres, you're a first assistant director, right? So if you wouldn't mind letting us know a bit about what your role is encompassing, we'll try and, filter through that process.
Well, it's always interesting because it is one of those things that I often, when I say to people, who don't know even the machine work, or even if they know the way the machine works a little bit, I have to explain it, and I have to find analogies that people can relate to, because the role of a first assistant director in a lot of ways is you are the set manager in a certain way. So the analogy that I always talk about is, in a military operation, the director is the general, and I'm like the lieutenant colonel on the battlefield with the soldiers carrying out the orders as they're issued. In a practical sense, if you understand the work of the set to be, multi-concentric circles, and in the dead center, you've got the director and the actors, so that I work everything else around that so that the director can only concentrate on what's going on with the actors. So everything from the background to the stunts to the special effects to wardrobe to all these other departments being all in sync with what we're doing. It's essentially my job to communicate what our plan is so that everybody is prepared at the same time together. Because when you've got a film set of like 250 people, it's easy for there to be disconnect if one department isn't in sync with what's going on. So it's essentially my job to keep everybody together so that we move as one unit flawlessly.
Well, I appreciate the breakdown. That was one thing that sort of I had to learn through experience. It was like, I remember the first time I understood what a first was, and it was because I didn't have one. It was very much first commercial experience. And I had a sort of a partnership with a director. It was more like we were kind of both working as directors and both working as DOPs on the same thing, because I was very lucky that I really respected his vision and what he would bring to the table. But I knew where my position was in terms of my lack of experience in that environment. So it was more like kind of almost bringing him on as a mentor. And that's kind of who he exists to me. And then he saw me running around trying to get some shots one day. And he was just like, Josh, you really need a first AD. And I was like, what's that? What's a first? What does that do? Because I didn't do the conventional film school stuff. I didn't necessarily understand the roles. And then as soon as I saw, real solid first AD doing their job, I was like, right, this makes so much sense now. And then suddenly just to being able to sort of, as you said, everyone focuses on their role, but it's as much about that as the cohesive communication. Like one person's unable to do their job properly and just focus on the task at hand, but also, that communication between everyone else to make sure everyone knows what's going on. So thank you for at least demystifying the role there, Doug, for the first part.
Yeah, and it's always interesting because, even in the level of like film school, people go to film school to be like writers or directors or cinematographers. So, it's not even really something that in film school people learn about. When they break into small pods and they're shooting things, someone essentially plays that role as the people moving the ball forward, but it's really not until you get out into larger scope projects in the commercial world, music videos and features, that you really understand the importance of that person as the crew gets bigger and bigger.
Yeah, because you were talking to different departments. Now suddenly a department has a role as, it's not just individuals doing that specific job anymore. It's not like, I can turn to my left or right and have a conversation with someone. It's like, that department now needs to know what's going on, but also that, I guess, ahead of time as well. But it's, it feeds nicely into part of the conversation that we've been kind of trying to have on this show is ultimately like, where do people find out who they are in this world? Because I know a lot of people have their, heads going, right, I want to be a director. And then they go, actually, I find myself concentrating more on shot style, aesthetic, all these sorts of things. I'm actually more inclined to be a DOP or a cinematographer. And then suddenly it finds them more naturally and organically. But I guess it'd be really interesting to know from your perspective as a first AD how you found your feet in that part of it as well. Like, were your brain just like naturally inclined to that kind of workload, or?
Well, pretty much. I mean, I'd say, you know, once again, every journey to this position, in any position in the film business, is different. I always tell people there is no, if you do A, B will happen, then C, then D. It's like it's a meandering route. And essentially, you know, I was in the bar business, and I'd been writing some scripts, and I said to myself, you know, I want to become a better writer. I want to understand how set works, right? This was just like me in New York, you know, and I had a job where I was working 3 nights a week. I had plenty of free time. I'm like, hey, let me figure out if I can get myself on a film set and understand how the machinery of a film set works. Maybe that'll make me a better and more appealing writer, right? This is
sounds like a way smarter approach than mine, for sure.
This is like the naive way of approaching things, which is, you know, this is the great thing about, you know, when early in our careers, we're naive enough to believe that anything can happen. And then, so essentially I was able to get on a film set and for like a very low budget feature movie. This was in the early 90s in New York. So there were a lot of low budget movies that were happening that essentially people worked on for free just to get experience, right? Because the unions didn't, you know, dive deep down into the micro budget world. So, you know, you could do these projects. So I ended up
that world fairly accessible at that time then, because like in my head, I'm deeming that like pre-mainstream digital era as
way before digital.
Yeah,
everything was still film. So this is, you know, 1993. So everything is still done on film. You know, there is no digital yet at this point in time. So essentially, you know, I get on a film set. And, you know, I was kind of, because I was in the bar business as a bartender, I was a little bit of a go-getter. I had an open personality, a little bit of a, you know, that type of thing. Not exactly a wallflower, an extrovert, you know. So I was on this set for about 2 days, and the director was this guy named Danny Liner, who unfortunately passed away last year. But you know, he became a big comedy director with Dude, Where's My Car, and Harold and Kumar.
I'm familiar.
But this was his first movie. It was a low budget thing called Laying Low. With Edie Falco, way before she was on The Sopranos. It was like a very interesting, you know, New York group of filmmakers and actors. But then he said to me, "Had a
good scene there, at least. It sounds like it had a good little
collection." It was a great, yeah. It was, you know, they were out of the Purchase Film School. Danny was, and Edie went to film school with him, and that was like Hal Hartley had gone there. So it was like an interesting, like little, really creative New York group. But Danny said to me after he saw me on set for 2 days, he goes, "You know what ADs do?" I go, "I got no idea, dude. I've been here 2 days. It's my first time on a film set." He's like, "Come hang out on set and watch what these people do." He's like, "I've been watching you. I think you'd be good at this." And I was like, "Oh, whatever. Okay."
Yeah.
Of course, like I went on set for a few days, and the ADs weren't happy. They're like, "Who's this new like guy who was a PA 2 blocks away 2 days ago? And the director just told to come watch us on set. What's going on here?" But sure enough, like, and you know, I was on this thing for like 2 weeks, and then what happened was right after that, so I was technically a PA. Then right after that, one of Danny's friends who was directing another micro-budget movie calls me up and says, "Hey, Danny says you'd be a good AD. You want to come be an AD on my movie?" And I'm like, I don't know any better. So I'm like, yeah, why not? I'll go do that. So at the same time, I'm like still bartending because I'm working for free, right? So I got to make some money living in New York. So I'm trying to bartend and work whatever, you know, 3, 4 days, 5 days a week on the movie. You know, when you're young and you got a lot of energy, you burn the candle at both ends.
When you can do it, yeah.
Yeah, and then
it's a good insight on dedication, though. To be fair, you know.
So that probably went on. So then all of a sudden, I'm an AD, right? So I was a PA for about 10 days in my career. You know, so I then start AD as a second AD on this thing, and then I'm literally about 3-4 weeks into it, and the first AD gets fired. The director and the producers are like, and then they turn to me. They're like, "Okay, you're the first AD now." I'm like, and then there's like a week left in shooting, so I'm like, "All right, okay, I can do that." I mean, I've been watching what the first did. I'm on set. I'm
amazing.
What to do? I mean,
the deep end welcomed you with open arms.
Yeah, and then so then that was it. And then after that, you know, and that was still. Then I did like another. So now it's like if I want to be a first AD, right? I can't bartend anymore because I gotta make, you know what I'm saying? Because it's a full-time commitment. It's not a part-time job like the other stuff I was doing. So then at some point, you know, maybe 6 months after I started, I stopped bartending and I just stuck with it, making really like $50-$60 a day. Yeah. You know, even as a first AD on no budget movies. But it was like I love what I was doing. And then after I did maybe on one movie, I met someone who was in the music video world, and they were like, hey, why don't you come first AD music videos? And this is the early 90s. So the hip hop music video scene in New York City is like really gaining
just trying to get going. Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of people are using that as their film school. So then I went into the music video, and then they were like, world, and they were like paying me as a first AD like $500 a day. I was like, oh my God, I just like hit the lotto. I was making like $50 like, 2 months ago.
I was about to say that's heyday for MTV, isn't it? When they started really throwing money at those.
Exactly. So then at that point, I'm doing like, Jay-Z, Busta Rhymes, Mariah Carey, Wu-Tang Clan. Like that was my film school.
My brain just went to Busta Rhymes videos as well. And I was like, they were some cool videos. They had so much
Hype Williams directed ones were pretty amazing. So I worked with like Hype Williams and David Myers and Chris Robinson, a lot of really the seminal like music video directors at the time. And then the interesting thing was, and then I stuck with that for a while, and music videos led to commercials. And then I ended up, one of the music video directors I worked with was a guy named Charles Stone. He ended up doing a movie for Miramax called Paid in Full that was primarily shot in Toronto, 80s, like, kind of like, hip hop gangster movie. Yeah. And then I did all the New York portion of it. And then right on the heels of that, he got a studio movie called Drumline. So about college marching bands. So then that was my first, I had to go into the union, into the Directors Guild to work on that movie. And then after that, and then that was it. Then that started my DGA portion of my career. And it's pretty much, been 95% features since then. And that was about 1999. So, a very different route.
I feel like we skim read way too much of that. I feel like that's just like so much information in that time. But, it's really fascinating. A couple of things that stick out there. I mean, there's this conversation about location, and a lot of people get hung up on it, especially in the States. Los Angeles being what would most of the world would consider being the home of cinema, to a degree, like conventional cinema. We're talking about blockbuster movies. We're not talking about, but it certainly is, as far as the Western world is concerned anyway, like that's where cinema kind of is. So like interesting for me to obviously hear about your experience within New York, because what I'm hearing is things start happening because you're in the right place at the right time. You're able to take advantage of the opportunity afforded to you. And I feel like this is a conversation that I don't really think about, but also have with a lot of other people when people are like, oh, well, I'm going to go to, college, university, these types of places. Where do I go? What kind of opportunities might be available to me? I mean, but of course, this isn't not just, a geographical conversation, but in terms of the timelines as well of the industry, like where you were in New York at that specific time, things were happening, and there was enough people around you that you were able to go, oh, well, there's this thing happening there next week. It's just interesting to see your perspective, especially now considering where you are, How do you feel about that?
Well, it's absolutely true. I mean, the bottom line is in certain ways you got to be in the mix early in your career, right? And you got to define what the mix is. There's, even like, it's interesting because, my generation was a little bit different. You only had these pockets happening in New York, as you said, or Los Angeles. That
mostly just accessibility, right?
Yeah, that might have almost been exclusively it. But I'm realizing now, as we've been doing these film roundtables, and I've had young cinematographers on who are from Chicago and Nashville. There's other places, and the one thing they do all have in common is that they are metropolitan areas, right? Where they're going to have a lot of people, where there's a creative vibe happening, right? Where is there
cultural mixing part of stuff? Yeah,
that's right. Where is there an artistic undercurrent? Because wherever you're going to find an artistic undercurrent, you're going to have music there. You can be in Austin, Texas. You can be, where you have music, you're going to have people who want to make music videos. You might have a music video scene. You might also, in this day and age, commercials, since so many commercials are shot directly for the internet, you've got commercial entities that exist, in lots of different places, but all still kind of in hubs where there is seeds of creativity that are blossoming.
Yeah. I guess the critical part of that is the short form as well. Accessibility to a form of filmmaking that people can achieve. It's like, oh, cool, it's a 2-minute music video, or even a 5-minute music video. And it's not like I'm trying to direct my first feature. with no information and no experience. It's like, right, actually, this is something we can sort of test bed, and you can do a couple of different things. That's interesting.
Short form is a great launching pad to be able to just kind of, get work and get ideas flowing and start to build the muscle, really,
Build the muscle, yeah. I guess that's something, isn't it? Certainly myself, including that conversation, kind of not really even understanding that it's something to be developed. Whether it be your imagination, whether it be, your experience. It's like you kind of, I don't know. It's an interesting. My brain's just gone in a million directions there, because there's just so many different parts of that conversation which become really fascinating to me. Especially that, like you said about that, there's a way to push yourself through this kind of like creative process in filmmaking. And the reason why I mention it is because you're talking about geographical context. We talk about these different metropolitan areas, but it's a broader conversation. We're getting pretty deep here about where that inspiration comes from. We're talking about these big areas, New York, Los Angeles. Well, what do we know about them? We know that there are pockets of resistance in them, but they also kind of, not in all extents, but they kind of do deliver similar results because of inspiration. People see each other working on similar things. They're like, oh, I like a bit of that. I'll take a bit of that and I'll put my own spin on it or whatever. Whereas like these smaller geographical locations, I'm thinking more about world cinema now as well. Like, especially when we look at the current state of the industry in terms of what kind of films are being made on large scales and what kind of movies are getting the budgets. Like, where does that real originality and creativity, of course, we use the term originality like sparingly, within film terms, of course. But it's just interesting as well to sort of, look at where those different pockets of creativity develop, especially when you talk about small town America and these sorts of places where these you're starting to learn about these different places that had little pockets of resistance and different sort of film collectives and places like that.
Yeah, I mean, the bottom line is people have to start somewhere, and the easiest place to start is in your own backyard. And then from there you grow out. Like, I think it's much more valuable for, especially someone, let's just say, as a cinematographer and a director right now, in those two roles, for you to build up your resume and your workload, whether it be shorts, music videos, spec spots, wherever you are, before you decide that you're ready to like kind of step into the New York or LA market, right? New York and LA, to show up there without anything under your belt, and be like, I'm a cinematographer, I'm a director, is a hard pill. You really need to show up.
You're going to get sat down fast.
Here's what I did. Here's what I've done. And then people will take you more seriously.
That is interesting, though. That whole conversation about getting taken seriously. I feel like I'm having, again, this is like, of course, there's, stuff that just sets off the mind again. I've heard that before. That's familiar. It's like that initial making your mark, because it's like the easiest thing to have zero confidence in this industry, especially when it seems, at least, from the amateur perspective, to be, quite standoffish, quite elitist, all these sorts of things in terms of accessibility. Like, you must be good to start with. There's an anxiety that comes with that, and a pressure that comes with that sort of thing. Like I said, my brain's going in different directions about that kind of conversation, because it's one that I wish I could just like pick up every filmmaker and be like, it's okay. Just take your time, think about what you're doing, and just cultivate your own voice. And that's the most important thing. Forget the money, forget this, forget that. Just find out. I mean, you mentioned it yourself, your own, backyard is the most important thing. What are your stories? What's going on around your area? I paid attention to one of Brad Pitt's things, actually. He put out with, I forget what the site was, but he did a little spot. It was like a 20-minute piece about his career and stuff. And I found it very interesting for him to hear about that initial starting point for him, because from my perspective, it's something that I negated, and I didn't necessarily focus on what was going on around me. I found the inspiration to be from, at least not big budget features necessarily, but UK features, and sort of watching them and going, oh, I want to make something like that, rather than going, well, what's really resonating with me around my life? But I think that's a sign of maturity more than anything else. I think it just took me a long time to figure out who I was and what resonated with me in terms of like what really did, we understand that films exist on multiple levels, in terms of our understanding of them. There's the story and the narrative, but then there's like, well, what's the filmmaker really trying to communicate here? And I think that's just, a respect and understanding that comes with experience. So It's just interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, it's hard, because the bottom line is, and I've said this to people all the time, if you start to do this because you want to do it for the money, you're getting into it for the wrong reasons.
Yeah.
Do it for the creative nurturing that it gives you, and in time the money will come. But the point of the matter is, nobody starts off in this business, if they do, thinking that, oh, I'm going to be making a lot of money. You're totally doing the wrong thing. Because there's going to be many years where you're making no money, and then it's going to be all of a sudden there's going to be a huge leap, and then you're making decent money. Then there's a bigger leap from that, But all of that is none of that all pales in comparison if you're not nurturing your creative thoughts. And you're actually a very good point in talking about, there's the Safdie brothers out of New York, or, who just most recently did Uncut Gems. But if you look at their filmography, such New York stories going back to micro budget movies, and they're such an interesting twosome in terms of understanding their storytelling and their directive, which is not about money at all. Like they have a film collective that they have with like 3 or 4 other, their editor, their producer, it's like a hive that that they've all been working through together. But it's an interesting way of looking at it. They just want to tell stories. They want to write and direct, I think that's the thing that people need to know. And that, the cream will rise to the top. This is an egalitarian business. If you just do it for the right reasons, which is the creative impetus of creating something, and, if you're able to create something that connects with you more personally, that's probably 9 out of 10 times going to be of higher quality, because it's going to resonate who you are.
Yeah, and ultimately resonate with audiences, right?
Yeah.
That's the thing. Is like, if it affects you at a core level, it's going to affect other people at a core level. You just have to make sure that there's enough connective tissue, there's enough like depth in it. You're really getting to know the characters. I know certainly from my perspective as a writer, it's something I've been developing as an individual, understanding how those dimensions actually like are created. But no, it's a pleasure to hear you say these things as well, just from my own sort of compounding perspective. And I think that's definitely feedback on the round table conversations. I've been so grateful to hear this, like, as much as it is learning from these incredible people that you're talking to, it's as much compounding, like, oh, actually, you know what, I did get that bit right. I'm on the right track. And I think that's certainly something that we're trying to, bring that conversation forward in this regard as well, and just help people understand, like you said, the money, man. Like, it's so easy for people to get caught up thinking, it pains me to say, but I had legitimate conversations where people just like assume that you're a millionaire and all this sort of stuff. And it's like, whoa, what is happening? I mean, we're going to have this conversation because it's a little bit funny anyway. But my landlord tried to increase my rent a couple of years ago. And I was like, it's cool, let's have a conversation. I'm more than happy to do so if you can, justify the means, all these sorts of things. Literally said to me over a telephone call, it's okay, you're in the film industry, you can afford it.
Right. They don't realize it's actually the inverse, I mean, I've got directors who I'm very good friends with who've made, studio movies, and it's like, they are by no means millionaires, it's like, especially, a lot of those guys who don't necessarily do something for 3, 4, 5 years in between. It's like, so yeah, I mean, there is a misconception, that, and I think what it is that, people years ago, if you were like a producer, a director, or writer, because there were so few of them, right? So that those people were all, and also the way the financials were structured, directors owned pieces of their movies, which now is not the case.
Really? It's interesting to know.
Oh yeah. I mean, a lot of time, like going back to the days, Coppola and early score 70s and even through the 80s, a lot of directors had like big tie-ins with the box office, you know what I mean? And you got to think about how less amount of movies came out those years than they do now. Now, a lot of people are just gun for hires. You get a salary, you get your DGA residuals, you get a producer credit, you get something else. And even producers, in the old days, like a producer could just make a movie every 5 years and they had great income, or if you look at a filmography of a producer who maybe made 6 movies in their career, but, lived an incredible lifestyle of wealth because they
residuals,
they owned a huge piece of the movie. But now it's like, producers, got to make a movie every year like everybody else. They got to kind of like depend upon one yearly check, so.
Wow, mate, I appreciate your insight here, because it's good for me to even learn about this equity share. Because like in my head, again, bring in an original idea on paper, if you're, say, a writer director, this is always what I want to pursue, because I wanted to tell my own stories, regardless of how good they were. I wanted to make sure that I was the one that was committing that from paper through to the final medium at the end of the day. So I kind of always had the idea of ownership in my brain. But obviously I know a lot of people want to be directors or writers or whatever role you might want to be. So it's interesting to know that, like, in terms of the equity share or whatever, people are relinquishing that in favor of a job at the end of the day, right?
Yeah, I mean, pretty much, so it is a misconception, even if you're like, a working, director, for people to make the assumption, that you're built of money, because, that's not necessarily the case. A lot of directors give up, and they'll even give up like, a salary and kick it back into the movie to get a movie made, because, people want to get the stories made. So it's like, and they want, as much quality to be up on the screen. So if that means cutting corners on getting paid or reducing a producer fee or a writer fee, if you've written and directed something, you're going to do that just to kind of get the project made, Yeah. So it's, it's very different. I mean, in certain ways, it's not so much different than, Coppola, who had to mortgage his house to finish Apocalypse Now, but look what that got him, so it's like,
yeah, when you look at that, it's a different perspective, isn't it? And that's just the other side of it, understanding that you are going to pay for this with your time or with your money or whatever it might be. There's going to be, there's collateral involved from, numerous perspectives. No, it's really interesting. I'm very, very grateful for your insight, because there's so much of this. I mean, there is obviously disparity between the UK and the US in this different regard, but there's definitely similarities at the end of the day, because more movies are being made now than ever before, with the emergence of the streamers, who are sort of like, there's just more demand for content because we're perpetuating this instantaneous gratification thing. It's like, oh, cool. We have this perception that we need something new to satisfy our attention constantly. It's like, oh, well, why would that not exist in feature films? Well, let me think about that for a second. To write a good feature doesn't take 5 minutes.
Right. Exactly. It's a laborious process to not just write it, but then to try, it's like, I can't tell you and it's, once again, like anything else in this business, there is not like a guaranteed path of A, B, C, D. I can't tell you the amount of high quality scripts I've read that have never been made, and the amount of low quality scripts I've read that have gone straight to production. So it's definitely like there is such a weird amalgamation of it's like ingredients in a soup, right? It's never going to taste the same, and you don't know, what ingredient is the final thing that gets served.
Yeah, you sub one in and out, and it can change the whole thing, right?
Yeah. So it's a difficult process, and the most difficult process of it that I've seen is just, it's very hard in general, getting material read in this business. I'm sure it's in the UK, or, because people only have so much time, they can't be reading, and how quality scripts get to the right person is somewhat of a flawed process, because 90% of the time someone's got an assistant that's reading it, that then says to their boss, oh, this is good, go. But then, you might have written something that doesn't appeal.
That person still has to evaluate it, right?
Yeah, it doesn't appeal to a 25-year-old assistant, but they're passing judgment on it before they hand it off to their boss, who's a person who could, ultimately say, oh, I want to make this or not. So yeah, it's a tough system. It's hard, and there's, but it's how it's been always. It's always been the fact that it's very hard to get, projects read.
Huh. Do you think there's any other major factors that sort of, as you said, quite, importantly there, quality project doesn't necessarily make its way through to production, whereas, a lesser quality one, or for whatever reason, gets a straight line through to green light? Are there any other factors that are coming into that from your perspective?
Well, I mean, the factors in general are, for whatever reason, a studio might believe that one thing is a moneymaker. Right. Like when I'm talking about quality scripts, I come from a different, like, in terms of what I love to see as story, I'm not like a studio exec who looks at something and says, oh, we can make money off this, or this is going to be a hit, Yeah. So a lot of the times I might be referring to a script that's an amazing read, that's this, that, and the other. But a studio person might look at that and be like, yeah, it's a great story. It's kind of amazing characters, but I don't think we're going to make any money off it. So they're not interested in going forward with it, that tends to happen in a lot of the high concept comedy realm, right? You get a lot of these movies made that are somewhat, sophomoric and silly, but there's an audience for them and they're going to make money. So, someone's going to greenlight, something like that versus something that's going to have a lot more heart and pathos that, it's difficult to tell if that movie's going to resonate or not.
Yeah. And I suppose you're still relying on someone that is writing a check at the end of the day.
You are. So it's like, there's the age old, and as part of the thing, there's been a big discussion now, like as we talk about all things COVID, what has the pandemic done to the theatrical distribution system, right? It's definitely lent somewhat of a crushing blow because even before this, right, the big, at least in the United States, it was all about like the big tent poles. Right, you would have every weekend during the summer, you would have like a Marvel movie or a DC movie coming out. And if you went to
butts to the movie theater, right? Yeah.
Yeah, if you went to a 12-plex, they were on 8 or 9 screens out of the 12, and it became harder and harder for like those mid-level movies, even comedies, so to speak,
even get a chance. Yeah, right.
Resonate, and that in certain way has been where the streamers have been able to pick up and buy those movies or get those movies made. Because they need the content, because the streamers can appeal to a dozen different niches, right, to bring people to watch. So
and they're looking at algorithms. They can literally tell what has been working and what hasn't been, right? So
if they've got a little slice of pie, that they say, okay, we need something that appeals to the 35 and up crowd. Here it is, because, the truth of the matter is, what's been happening in the theaters a lot, the theater is driven a lot by young adult purchasing, teenagers and young adults going on, to see either a combination of like superhero movies, right, which are big action tent poles, or even in the horror genre, which the horror genre is interesting because the horror genre succeeds in group theatrics. Why? Because people feed off of each other's fear and angst. During a horror movie, like the suspense level, it's like people like to scream together, be scared together, in certain ways. Like that's always been a case since like the 50s, with like
and last people want to do is feel something in front of each other, like I'm crying.
Exactly. There's something about the communal response in a horror movie which has lent itself to like Blumhouse and some of these other production companies being really successful with using that genre on a theatrical level.
I'm grateful to hear the insight again. And there's different ways you think about different things. And I somewhat skeptically evaluated the things like that kicked off that resurgence in the horror movie genre of things like Paranormal Activity, just because they were made on a shoestring and they were able to return a great deal. So it's like, right, purely financial decision making. But obviously, as you said, actually there's the other side of it, which is experience. What are people looking for in movies these days when they've got so many other distractions? It's like, well, I can go and actually enjoy that experience as a different thing. And I guess, I don't know, I'm speculating a lot here as well, but I guess the movie-going experience or the movie thought process is more of an individual experience these days because there's so much more choice. Like, it's tailored to us to a degree. And I guess it's people that want, high concept, high drama or whatever it might be. I personally am a fan of things like 3 Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri by Mark McDonough. Yep. Like, that's my thing. It's like that I could watch until the end of time because the stories are powerful, but it's so much depth gone into that and exists on such an incredible visual storytelling playing field. I mean, actually, it brings me on nicely to a conversation about some of the movies you've worked on, actually. You were most recently on, I want to say Ad Astra, but was that your last movie?
Well, last released. I have a bunch of movies that are caught up in the pipeline of COVID. But last release was Ad Astra with James Gray, that Hoyte van Hoytema shot.
Incredible cinematographer.
Yes, wonderful man, wonderful sweet man. Brad Pitt. That was
name drop all you want. It's all good.
But that was an interesting one because right before that with James, we had done Lost City of Z, which in a lot of ways is a very Hearts of Darkness tale, so to speak. It's about, this explorer going upriver and he develops this, it was very much Joseph Conrad, Hearts of Darkness, which, for those of you
is that Charlie
Hunnam.
Charlie Hunnam, yeah. I've seen it.
Yeah, so for those of you that understand, Hearts of Darkness is essentially what Apocalypse Now is based on, right? But Hearts of Darkness takes place in the 1890s, the Belgian-Congo Wars, but it's about a madman going upriver. But in Lost City of Z, it's Hearts of Darkness in the sense that it's a man who is possessed with a thought, constantly returning to the Amazon to find this lost civilization. The interesting thing was Ad Astra, in a lot of ways, was Hearts of Darkness in space, right? It was actually literally Apocalypse Now, Hearts of Darkness in space, because Tommy Lee Jones' character plays like a madman on the outer reaches of the solar system, you know, and in certain ways, Brad Pitt's character is almost like Martin Sheen, where he's sent up through space to go find the madman, you know, so, you know,
breaking a lot of hearts with this narrative as well. It's like understanding there's this underlying narrative that exists throughout a lot of movies here, and it's just like, let's just paint that with a different veneer.
Well, I mean, you know, that's what I tell people all the time. That's Shakespeare, right? The 7 tenets of Shakespeare are told over and over again, you know, and you know, and there's absolutely, you know, I mean, what is West Side Story if not a retelling of Romeo and Juliet, you know? And it's like Steven Spielberg just made West Side Story, you know, last year. Remade the remake, you know, of Romeo and Juliet. So it's
funny to hear when people start picking apart the remakes and the reimaginings and all these sorts of things. It's like, well, it's not so bad really, because the reality is, if anything, they're being more honest about it.
But you know, there's you know, a great director once told me, he said, you know, there's no shame in stealing, just steal from the best. You know, so
I love that.
So, but that's the truth. So a lot of these, what I always tell young people, because I often, you know, give seminars or classes for like high school or college students, I say, you cannot become a great writer of screenplays unless you've been a great reader of stories, right? Because it's the idea of understanding the structure of storytelling. And you can go all the way back to Shakespeare, the original, like creating the structure of drama, of comedy, of tension, you know, and then just, you know, make it a spin of your own, like, you know, update it. You know, what is a movie like Clueless, if not an update of a Shakespearean? There's so many things you look at which are just updates.
Yeah, but dramatic reveal is that, isn't it? When you look at those storytelling techniques and things, if you look at, there is a reason why these structures and constructs exist within narrative, because it's how we feel and think about how those things happen. Like, we empathize with certain things. Well, if something's kept from a character, that doesn't sit right with me. That person's going to find out about that soon, and now I'm tense. I'm like, these things exist within narrative, don't they? So it's funny to reflect upon them, but at the same time, you know, we're essentially chopping and changing different characters when it's different things. But I mean, that's a wonderful testament for cinema anyway, isn't it? Because you look at all these emerging filmmakers, you talk about Safdie brothers specifically, you know, they've taken, and even in Uncut Gems, I was lucky to see Good Time as well. Uncut Gems is just like that quintessential, like, like, I know, please let something positive happen to this character the whole way through. Just give me something that just helps this person out. And then even, you know, without spoiling, it's like, even at the end, you're like, oh man, come on.
Yeah, exactly. So, you know, it's, you know, so it is. So it is interesting how, you know, I mean, you know, as you started out asking me about Ad Astra, it's like, you know, story movies are oftentimes built upon the shoulders of other stories that have been told, you know, and it's just somewhat of a retelling or an original interpretation.
That's the thing. There's so many variables that there's infinite variables essentially within filmmaking parameters that you can go, taking a concept which has already essentially got the underlying narrative of a similar story, but putting it in a different place and time, and subsequently with different actors and different crews, and, you know, let alone the variables that are within cinematography by itself as a craft, you know, especially with emerging technologies and different ways we can condense cameras and lighting and all these sorts of things to create different environments, worlds. I mean, we talked a little bit about, on the last show I did with a couple of friends of mine, just generally, you know, spitballing about the industry generally and talking about the Unreal Engine technology that's sort of allowing the CGI environment to have its own thing. And it's just like, we can reimagine so many things that perhaps didn't. I mean, a prime example would be something like Westworld, you know, has its movie debut once upon a time, and then technologically we're now able to reimagine it in a completely different way that honors the immersive experience so much better. Like, it's like, well, you know, better, whatever you want to call it. But from my perspective, it was better. But it's like, right, cool. We can look at what would be, you know, robotics and AI and things, go, oh wow, I'm immersed in that. My suspension of disbelief is right in there with what this is trying to do. And I'm sure I can speak from your, put words in your mouth a little bit, but at the same time, that's like the biggest challenge of watching anything these days, is like, I want to be in it. It's so easy to deconstruct it and reverse engineer everything you're watching all the time. It's quite a challenge to like actually just relax, turn the brain off, and enjoy the experience that the filmmaker's trying to actually put in front of you.
Yeah, no, and Westworld's a great example, right? Because that primarily is a story about robots in an amusement park from the 70s, right? So, but then now, with the advances we have, as you said, it's to see how, like Jonathan Nolan is able to take that to another level, so to speak, just based upon that one kernel of a story idea that was created almost 50 years ago.
Yeah. I personally love it. And I love Anthony Hopkins in it. I love his character and how eloquently he explains the different intricacies of the human brain, because that's what ticks my boxes. That's the sort of thing that intrigues me so much.
Yes, and Jonathan and Lisa Joy, his creator partner on that. I mean, just their ability to be able to, to not just bring that up to modernity, but then even expand, take it beyond, because obviously when the story was originally written, there was no concept of AI and all this stuff, but just to take, what was season one, the basic thread that matches back to the original story, and then just build upon that as they keep going, in the series is, that's once again also an amazing example of just, of storytelling that uses something and creates building blocks to go further.
Yeah, certainly. I'm particularly intrigued by your relationships with directors and crew generally as well, because again, it's something that I've come to understand within my own experience, is how, like, I guess, symbiotic these relationships become, but how important it is to have a rapport with your crew. I mean, we talked quite, we removed the emotion a minute ago. We're talking about jobs, directors getting hired, these sorts of people. We're like, is there still an environment where you're carried through with a relationship? I know you've obviously worked on your last 6 features with James Gray, right?
Yeah. So 6 movies with James. But there's there's a lot of directors that I work with. If I haven't worked with them multiple times yet, we've tried to, and things haven't gotten off the ground. But I believe it's very important to have, that type of a relationship. That's why, as you see in my credit list, I get a producer credit with a lot of the different directors that I work with over and over, because the idea is building that shorthand. It's like, as I've said, I become a very integral part of the process in the director. Like a director, if you look at directors, Steven Spielberg, works with Adam Sumner all the time. So does Paul Thomas Anderson. A lot of directors really want a first AD that they can work with all the time. I'm always leery when I meet with a director for the first time, and I realize that over the course of 8 years, they've worked with 8 different first ADs. Then I understand that director is not interested in having the type of relationship that I am interested in having, which is being a member of a team and being a very important extension of the creative force that is a director. Yeah. So it's incredibly important for me to, be able to create that relationship with the director. And as you say about crew, for me, the crew is essential. And the crew is going to go above and beyond for you if they believe in you in certain ways. One, they believe that you have their back, that you're there to protect them. That's a big role of the first AD, to make sure that the crew is safe. They need to feel safe, and they need to feel properly motivated, not motivated by yelling and berating. That's the negative way that there are directors and first ADs that choose that tack. And thank God they're becoming less and less as time goes on. When I first started out, there were more and more of them, because that was part of the old school methodology, right? Directors and first ADs were tyrants, specifically first ADs, right? People would always say first ADs were, the yellers and the screamers on set. And that, I come in from a totally different way. It's like, that's not a way to approach a set. And I think more and more you see that now. The norm is communication, to do everything to be the calm and the force of chaos, and the crew will do so much more for an AD and for a director if they believe in them, rather than if, they feel put off by them.
Yeah. I mean, if you wouldn't mind breaking it down for us, where does that role start for you? Like, how early in the process of a new feature do you get involved with that, with those heads of department starting to figure out these conversations
right from the get-go, right in prep. So, one thing that I failed to mention when you're asking me about my job description, for those who don't know, but I was talking about during the shooting time, but in prep, essentially I'm given the script, right? And I'm given the script and I have to break it down, which means, break down every single scene element and create a schedule. So we have 50 days to shoot it. We've got 10 days we can be at this location. We've got this actor for 14 days. It's like, it's a jigsaw puzzle, right? And I start putting the puzzle.
A lot of people don't necessarily think about that as like, oh, actually, you might only have certain people for certain time commitments. It's not as simple as going, right, you signed on for 3 months and you're with us for every day.
No, you'll get a certain actor you've got for 2 weeks. You got to shoot him out, and he's in these many locations. So it's a puzzle that I put together so that we can navigate our shooting schedule. That's early on in prep. And in prep, obviously, as the department heads are coming on and we're doing testing and location scouting, a lot of it is them understanding the type of person you are and, that you're willing to be supportive of them. With the very difficult part of this business is, people are always afraid to tell a director no, like meaning, no, we can't do that. We don't have the ability to do that, and you need to have people feel protected that if something's asked for, they got to be like, no, we can't really make that happen. And, and they know that you're going to help out in a situation where either you're going to help the director to understand that, and there'll be directors right away who it's like, okay, let's problem solve. How can we do it? Versus the ones who are like, no, that's how I have to have it. Why can't we do it? I need a crane from the 37th floor to come down, on a Spidey cam and do this. And it's like, well, we can't really, we don't have the, whatever the reasons may be. So a lot of in prep,
again, I guess that's exactly why this relationship's really critical, isn't it? You've got a mutual understanding. What I'm telling you, you've got to trust it, because I'm not telling you to waste your time or to like throw in a spanner for no reason. It's like, there's a reason and a rationale behind it. Let's move on. Right.
Yeah. Exactly. And then, so, and a lot of that is, the crew really having a sense, a belief that you're supportive of them, and that you're also a very good conduit for the director, because, a lot of times, especially in the prep process, the key grip's not going to go directly to the director with something, but if he's got a concern or an idea about something, he might mention it to me or the cinematographer, and we might hash it out, then bring it to the director. So,
such an important point here is like, speaking from first-hand experience, being a director on set, you might be evaluating 1,000 different things at once, and they might all be problems right now. Trying to find solutions in the jigsaw puzzle by yourself. Grip comes up and says, we can't mount the camera here or put that there or whatever. It's like, now you're giving me a new problem that's now going to take all my attention away from that thing. So, that's such a critical part of that puzzle, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, you got to be a filter. You have to be a filter for the director in lots of ways. And that's what comes from the idea of a director trusting you and me building a relationship with directors I work with constantly, because I know when, oh yeah, this is something I should talk to so-and-so about, or no, let me handle this on my own. And I'm not going to get a director who's like, well, why didn't you mention that to me? I'm like, no, because I could handle, So that's part of the equation of creating a relationship between the director and the first AD that can go from project to project to project, is because there is an extension of the mind. There is an extension of the creative and the managerial process, because there is, as you've said, there is so many decisions to be made. A director gets really comfortable in the fact that there is somebody who can help him filter some of that, him or her filter some of that, rather than be forced to take that all on him or herself,
I learned this the hard way, fully, There was always a sort of minor conundrum going like, I'm just kind of used to dealing with a lot of stuff going on. You get very used to that. It's only when someone starts alleviating the pressure and taking some of those decisions off you that you start going, oh, I can be 100% better at my job now because I'm able to think about just that. Like you said, it might just be performance. It might be evaluating a certain part of the scene. It might be what a composition is saying. It might be the lighting. It might be any number of really, really important decisions that are just to do with that part of the scene or dialogue or whatever is happening within the story. It might be something simple like keeping track of the story. Oh, maybe that writing doesn't quite play out as we want it to. But if you're distracted by something else, you're not going to notice. And I've definitely fallen foul of that myself. Again, just compounding the importance of your role here, mate. No, I appreciate the breakdown. I think certainly, going to some degree of insight into. I'm just helping understand what that role looks like, and of course, it has many different hats, as I'm sure you'll communicate. I'm even hearing things that definitely overlap with the producer role there. It's like actually thinking about the different schedules, the different people that are involved in managing those different relationships, starts to overlap quite significantly, and it makes sense why you get a producer credit on some of the things you're working on, or a lot of them. Very, very fascinating, though. I very much appreciate it. So, I mean, I don't want to implicate you or anything here, but like, have you got a favorite director you work with? You got a favorite relationship you're cultivating?
Well, what I always like to say is, my director friends are often like children. You're not going to say which one's your favorite. You enjoy them all, and they have different pluses and minuses, I mean, that's the thing. It's like, it's easy to look at my relationship with James Gray because we've done so many movies together. We go back for so long, but there are other directors, who I find incredibly. I just did last year a trilogy for Fox at the time with Lee Janiak. And she was such an empowering force, a writer-director. We shot 3 movies back to back to back as a trilogy for Fox that was supposed to come out this summer. And we've maintained great friends. And she's like, I find her to be an incredibly brilliant, empowering person. Like, and then Jason Hall, who I did a movie called, Thank You for Your Service. And he was the screenwriter on I don't know why the Clint Eastwood movies is American Sniper. And we've been friends for over the years. And he's such a great, interesting, human being. There's so many different, and they're all different to me in different ways, but I enjoy, and I've kept a relationship, with so many of them. And cinematographers as well. I have, with Darius Kanji and Roman Vazanayoff and Bradford Young. I mean, there's, a lot of cinematographers who I really enjoy working over and over again, almost in the same vein as the shorthand that's created with the director, being able to have a melded mind to really creatively do something, So, there's a bunch of them, as I said. I just try and they're
all right. I knew that you'd walking into that. Well, you can't say who your favorite kid is. I get it. I completely get it. But I wanted to hear your thought process about it. And, ultimately very interested to see who and why you like working with different things, but also to hear some different names out there. But what it did spike up there is that conversation about cinematographers as well. I mean, how much of a relationship do you have with cinematographers? Do you find yourself getting recommended by those people, or?
Oh, yeah. As a matter of fact, I can tell you a perfect example. There was Roman Vazanayoff, who I worked with on the Jason Hall movie, Thank You for Your Service, which was a movie about war veterans, PTSD, who suffer from PTSD. He had been David Ayer's DP and had shot Fury and End of Watch and Suicide Squad for David. And then when David got hired to do Bright, which was the huge Netflix movie with Will Smith and Joel Edgerton, Roman essentially called David and said, "David, you got to hire Doug. He'll be great for you." And David hired me just on Roman's recommendation. And then, I worked with David on that big action movie for Netflix. So, I
love the look on that movie, by the way. Really enjoyed Bright from the aesthetic perspective for a number of reasons.
Yeah, I mean, Roman is a great friend of mine. We've tried to get, many projects together after that as well. And my relationship with the cinematographers, I have a great relationship. And it's funny because I was just kind of rewatching last night the roundtable with Bradford Young and Darius Kanji and myself. And because Bradford was talking to us both a lot about working on Lost City of Z together and the difficulties of location shooting in Colombian jungle and river. And, he started to ask a question about, my ability to work so much with DPs. He was talking to Darius, and Darius is like, because Doug is really worried about, the light and how good the images look. And then when Bradford asked me why, I said, because I think in a previous life, I was a cinematographer. So, it's as simple as that for me. It's like, I am concerned with one of the many hats I wear in keeping the ball rolling. I love beautiful images. And so I've always developed a great relationship with cinematographers because I take it upon a challenge when we're on a scout and the cinematographer says, "Ooh, if we could be here at 4:15 because the way the light is over there," and I'm like, "We're going to be here at 4:10. You better be ready at 4:15. We're going to shoot that shot." You know what I mean? So
honestly, it's music to my ears. It's wonderful to hear, because it just, demonstrates further the level that you're operating at, and is an absolute reason why you are where you are. And you've done, you've got the credit list, which is ridiculous and amazing for so many different reasons, because there's a different level of care and duty of care to to your responsibility that is definitely resonating and echoing with me here. That makes perfect sense. In so many regards, like you said, it's like there's a way to do these things and there's a way not to do these things, but certainly having respect to the image. It's a visual medium. That's the thing the audience is looking at, regardless of what they're listening to. Of course, everything else is important, but it's visual. We're watching something here, and you could just go, oh no, we can't get on set till 6, whatever. Like, you got to be here at 4, cool, let's do it.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that's a big thing. And I think, I do think that is what, there's a handful of other ADs in the game, such as myself. And I think we all share that common understanding of, it's about giving it all up for what is best for the project, how to do your part to understand how to make it the very best thing it can be.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. At the end of the day, the trauma that you might be undergoing to get there on a specific day is, just so insignificant when you think about the fact that this image and this film lives on. That's the thing that lives on forever, the thing that they're having to look at and edit for months. and the last thing you want is someone going like, nah, would have been nice to get that sunrise, wouldn't it? And that's the other side of it, I suppose, isn't it? But it's wonderful to hear you. A big part of this conversation, is also, do you have much say in what roles you get involved with? Do you have much, is it very much you're evaluating things on a case-by-case basis? How important is it that story resonates with you as an individual within your role?
Well, the story is very important. It all comes down to story and character at the end of the day. So that I find, I get lots of scripts, and it's like, I always, there's two things. There's two pieces to the overall machine process. I always say one is just straight availability, right? I'm either on something. I've often been called for something great. I got 3 more months on this, can't do it. But when I'm in the ability to compare apples to apples and ready to choose a project, script and story is paramount. And I don't even think about it, as I said, from money-making standpoint, right? How we started this discussion. I'm looking for the story that absolutely resonates with me, the characters that absolutely resonate, and how I want to be involved.
I'd love to know, what stories are the most not interesting. What are the ones that resonate with you most? Yeah, that's the best way to ask.
Well, I mean, I think in a lot of ways, we're all flawed human beings. So, there is something very interested in I'm not attracted to things that exist within the realm of reality. I like human interest. I like people who are human beings. I gravitate towards flawed human beings in a lot of ways. I mean, for me, it's like, if I want to put it on a big budget scale, like a movie like Joker, right? That's an amazingly flawed human being, So it's like, and also with filmmakers who, with filmmakers who kind of have their own way of telling a story, I'm always going to gravitate. I'll get a script, I'll read it. I'll be like, oh, I'm interested in the story. Who's the director? Oh, and I'll do a little bit of research. Like, I don't mind working, with a younger director I haven't heard of. If I do a little bit of research and people like, oh my God, this person has some great ideas, this, that, and the other, and a lot of it too is my initial, because my number one caveat is when I meet, I get a great sense of people. So when I meet the director and how that conversation goes, in a lot of ways, when I'm talking to a director, I'm interviewing them. Even though they think they're interviewing me, I am interviewing them. I'm trying to understand. I turn the tables in the discussion with the director to get them to tell me what it is they're trying to do, what they're going for, this, that, and the other. And in doing that, I think they subconsciously realize how helpful I may be to them because I've dug that deep into their process.
Again, music to my ears. It's so wonderful to hear you speak about it because it's all of the different reasons, but very specifically, of course, that, especially the interviewing process, it's like, because again, a lot of people within this industry kind of like take the paycheck and they go like, I need to work, I need to keep going, I need to, or I'm going to cease to be relevant. You know, it's a very early anxiety that comes with it. It's not something, of course, within your position that you are, but to understand that there's a two-way choice to this, and there's a very much a two-way relationship. And it's not just, right, you're the AD, I'm going to hire you. It's like, well, there's an importance that there's some communication here, and you have a choice in what we're talking about, we're thinking about, that makes this relationship work. And yeah, I think, like I said, it's probably more to do with the up and coming part of that industry. I certainly felt it myself, you know, when I first started on taking on commercials and those sorts of things to start earning money when I first started out, because I realized that it's all really good having these wonderful ideas, but I still got to pay the rent. You know, I did whatever I could to make ends meet at the beginning, but certainly understanding that, you know, you have a choice for all, you know, for so many different aspects, because, you know, this is a time-consuming medium more than anything else, and you can't look back on something and go, oh, well, you know, I just gave 6 months to that project and it's not quite what I hoped for, or I left some of my soul in it, you know, because that's the thing, isn't it? At the end of the day, you know, how much time and effort really goes into these things, even from the writing process. You know, writing process is going to take, in some cases, years, you know.
No, it's a whole thing. And you're absolutely right. And listen, and everyone at the beginning of their career has to take what they can to survive. And that's done across the board for directors, for cinematographers, for ADs, and all of the crew members. It's like, you know, until you start to get further on. And that's all when I referred to before, building the muscle. That's how you build a muscle. You work. You work, you work. You know, but then you're going to get to a point where you have to make a conscious decision, because you can be in the short form and the money can keep getting better and better. And then you're going to all of a sudden realize, I need to take a step back to work to make this movie financially, right? And that's often going to happen. And you have to be willing to do that or not do it. And it's a choice. I know commercial directors who are the top paid guys in their field, you know, they all wish they could have made a movie somewhere along the way. And somewhere along the way, they had that decision, right? But then they couldn't turn down the fact that they had this Nike spot and that they couldn't not do commercials for 10 months to be able to work on a movie.
I think it's easy to lose sight of that. Yeah.
Or, you know, and you could be very comfortable saying, you know, I've spent 25 years as a commercial director, you know, but then understand, if you look back and say, God, I wish I could have made a movie. That decision was yours, and yours to make or not make, you know? So, and
get the words out of my mouth. At the end of the day, our choices are our own. And I think certainly from my own perspective, you know, what's been going on is it's forced me to reevaluate. How comfortable do you want to be? What do you want your lifestyle to look like? And then how much of that you're prepared to sacrifice in order to get where you want to be, you know? And certainly I've gone like, right, actually, I don't need any of the stuff that I previously looked up to, you know, at all. I mean, this is going back a few years. I'm very lucky in this. I've had some very good people around me that kind of allow me to keep my feet on the ground with a lot of this stuff. And I'm not talking about, like I said earlier, I'm not millionaires by any stretch of the imagination. But even just like, right, do you want to be driving this car, or do you want to have that house, or whatever it might be? It's like you can just, you know, change the lifestyle, you know, expectations, and just go, right, actually, this is the most important thing to me, and I'm going to move forward in that direction because beaches is where I want to be. Well, make it happen. Like, I have those choices, and I'm very lucky that I'm at least somewhat aware of that. I'm very, very fortunate, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it was, you know, interesting because when we had the talk on the round table with Reed Morano, she alluded to that exactly, like how her career built up. You know, it was like, you know, and especially the difficulties of being a female cinematographer to then segueing to try and become a director, right? She almost had, you know, as much as this industry is doing everything it can to really open up for women and for minorities, there, you know, think about when, you know, Reed started breaking out several years ago. It was still very hard, you know, and she talks about those decisions having to be made, like the small indie movies that she was taking and that she chose to take, you know, based upon story, not upon anything else that got her exposure, you know, and, you know, it's that type of thing. It's like those decisions that you make, and those are the decisions that you make about yourself and the projects that resonate to you, you know, somehow will inadvertently work in your favor, you know, because as long as you stick to what's true to yourself.
Again, incredibly grateful to hear you say it, because it's just like, it's so, you know, wonderful to hear that it's all about the dedication and commitment paying off, isn't it? But like, not paying off literally financially, but like in terms of your own sense of satisfaction and understanding, like why you're committing your efforts, time, you know, all this really is compounding something that you're working hard on. And yeah, exactly. Those decisions you're making for the right reasons. Think about everything that you're doing and why that resonate. And then ultimately, when you've got 4 or 5 films behind you, it's like, yeah, I'm proud of that. I'm proud of every minute I put into that, because, well, I don't need to tell you, but certainly from a perspective of understanding that it's always the time and effort put in is always 100% more than you originally had the expectation of. I'm sure that aligns slightly differently as you get to the point of your career, I'm sure, and in your role as well, because obviously you're in charge of scheduling and making sure it all ticks on. So, you know, your role is probably more important than mine in terms of understanding just what minutes and hours look like in terms of pages and days.
Yeah, it's an evolving process, you know, but as you said, you got to love it to be in it. You get in it for the love, you stay in it for the love, and eventually, you know, you can still love it and be comfortable financially, and you don't need to have expectations of anything more than that.
I feel like I might know the answer to this, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Is the love still alive?
For me, it is. I still approach things with a childlike passion. The reason I love movies is they're all different, right? Every day, almost every, you know, I had the opportunity years ago, especially in New York, as episodic TV was developing. I never got into episodic TV because I thought that could dull my luster. That could kill my star in the event of the excitement of getting up every day and walking onto set and being like, okay, we're going to block this. How are we going to shoot this? What are we going to do? How's this going to work out? Like, I am still like a kid in the candy store every single day. I come with a certain passion that is part of who I am, you know, and you know, I don't think that's ever going to go away. And if it ever does, that's when I know I don't want to do it anymore, you know, but I've been doing it now for almost 25 years. And I have this giddy sense of nerves and passion each time I walk out onto set.
Amazing and wonderful to hear. I'm very, very grateful for your time today, for, as I said, for all the different reasons that I could reel off, but I'm not going to, because I'm just very humbled to hear everything from your perspective. I'm very grateful to hear everything as well. And just, you know, finally grateful to you and the team on Roundtable as well, to bring that from a completely different perspective, one that I've been very grateful to listen to and I'll continue to. From your perspective as well, with the Roundtable, what you guys got coming up? Is there anything we need to be looking out for?
Yeah, we got some good things coming up. A few things we're working on. Probably, I'm not sure when your podcast comes out, but on August 5th, I'm actually going to have James Gray and Anthony Katagis, who's been his longtime producer for a while. Mm-hmm. By the end of this month, Maria is trying to get her father, Rodrigo Prieto, and he's going to get some of the other Mexican filmmakers. We can't name names right now, but we're trying to do an episode all in Spanish for the Latin market. Wow. With a bunch of the the legendary Mexican filmmakers. So we've got that coming up. We're also going to do a big series with the LGBTQ filmmaking community. Some of the rising stars in that world talking about their process. So we really have some exciting things coming up, that we think are very different than
a very broad perspective on the world of cinema. And that's the thing, we've very much spoken about this tiny bit of it, like here's American cinema and here's kind of like your pocket of the world, but it's so expansive. And hopefully we're able to sort of expand our own spotlight in that regard as well, and hopefully bring some more attention to the different parts of the filmmaking industry. I mean, even one of my main goals with this is also just to highlight the fact that there's a professional world and there's a world where people just do it for fun and are interested in making films. And it's like so easy to get caught up in the money side of it, because ultimately, cool, you need money to get locations, to get this, that, and the other. Even if everyone's working for free, you need to make sure everyone's fed. You need to make sure all this stuff's happening. So like there is a whole different side of it. But no, I'm very grateful to hear that you guys are bringing this different parts of the world from film into the conversation for all the different, for everything really. It's incredibly grateful to hear from it, and I'm definitely be paying attention myself as well. So, I mean, I wanted to talk about opportunities as well today, but the reality is I know we're a finite amount of time with you today that we're very, very grateful for. So thank you so much for giving us your time as well. Thank you very much.
Well, listen, thank you for inviting me, and once again for sharing this forum. And, as we've constantly keep saying, is that, we just want to show young filmmakers out there that, stick to story, approach it with a big heart, and, the path will follow.
I couldn't have said anything better myself. So thank you, Doug. I really very much.
Thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you very much.
Very grateful. And all the best with Roundtable. I shall keep paying attention and we'll keep sharing stuff as well.
Thank you. Thank you, my friend. Bye-bye.